The first time a man watched another human being disappear beneath the sea in chains, he understood that the ocean did not kill quickly out of cruelty, but slowly out of indifference. The sea was never blue the way later generations would paint it. It was the color of old iron, bruised green in the mornings, black and endless at night, and it smelled of salt, decay, and men who had long since stopped believing they would die on land. For those who lived upon it, the ocean was not an escape. It was a sentence carried out day after day, wave after wave, with no judge and no mercy. Most pirates did not wake one morning and decide to become monsters. They began as boys with dirt under their nails and hunger in their bellies, raised in places where survival itself felt like a kind of theft. Coastal towns were full of them, watching ships come and go, listening to sailors speak of distant ports and easy coin. The lies sounded better than the truth they already knew. A ship, any ship, promised movement, and movement felt like hope. When a boy signed his name or pressed a thumb into ink, he did not understand that he was selling years of his life for a few meals and a place to sleep. Merchant ships were floating prisons ruled by men who believed fear was the only language sailors understood. Days began before sunrise and ended long after dark. The work never stopped. Lines cut into hands. Salt burned open wounds. A moment's slowness earned blows. Discipline was public and deliberate, meant to remind every man on deck how easily flesh could be broken. Food was a daily insult. Hard biscuit cracked teeth and crawled with insects. Meat was preserved so long in salt it barely resembled something once alive. Water grew thick and foul, yet men drank it anyway because thirst was worse. Disease spread through the cramped spaces below deck, coughing men lying shoulder to shoulder, fever passing quietly from one body to the next. When someone died, there was rarely time to mourn. The dead were sewn into canvas and slipped into the sea, their names already fading. It was under these conditions that the black flags first began to look less like terror and more like opportunity. When pirates came, they came loudly. Cannons thundered. Smoke rolled across the water. The merchant crew would gather, shaking, knowing the stories. But the truth revealed itself quickly. Pirates killed fewer men than captains did. They offered choices where none had existed before. Join us, they said, or return to the whip, or be set adrift and let the sea decide. Many chose the flag not because they loved violence, but because they were tired of being owned. Pirate ships ran on rules that shocked new men. Captains were elected. Shares were divided by agreement. Injury earned compensation. The quartermaster spoke for the crew, not against them. It was not kindness, it was necessity. A pirate ship survived only if men believed the danger was worth it.
The danger was always present. Pirates lived close to hunger. Fresh food was a luxury. Fruit vanished quickly. Meat spoiled. Scurvy crept in silently, swelling gums and loosening teeth until men could barely chew. Wounds festered. Infection claimed lives faster than blades. Surgeons worked with what they had, saws and knives dulled by use, performing amputations while the deck rolled beneath them. Men were held down by their friends. A leather strap was bitten through. Screams rose into the wind and vanished. Sleep was never deep. Storms came without warning, tearing sails, snapping masts, tossing ships like toys. Some nights the sea rose so high it seemed determined to swallow the sky. Men clung to rigging, praying to gods they did not fully believe in. Some ships never came back. The ocean kept them without comment. Violence became routine. Boarding actions were chaos at arm's length. Pistols misfired. Blades slipped on blood-slicked decks.
Men screamed as they fell, sometimes into the sea, sometimes under boots. Afterward came the quiet, broken by groans and the creak of wood. Bodies were pushed overboard. The water closed. The ship sailed on. Yet, even in this life, there were moments that felt almost gentle. Songs rose at night, rough voices blending together, singing of homes long gone, of mothers, of women remembered imperfectly. Laughter came suddenly, sharply, as if men feared silence more than danger. Friendships formed fast, burned bright, and ended just as quickly. Escape was rare. A few men vanished into ports, changed names, tried to live quietly. Many failed. The sea called them back, or the law found them, or their past caught up in the form of a noose. Wanted posters spread from port to port. Naval ships hunted relentlessly. The world was shrinking, and pirates felt it closing in. Capture meant spectacle. Trials were brief. Mercy was rare. The condemned were marched to the docks, while crowds gathered to watch. Children laughed. Vendors sold food. The rope was placed. Some men cursed. Some prayed. Some said nothing at all. The drop came. Sometimes death was quick. Sometimes it was not. Those whose bodies were left in iron cages suffered even after death. Salt air ate flesh. Birds fed freely. The tide rose and fell beneath them, a reminder that the sea would outlast everyone. The horrible life of pirates was never about freedom the way stories would later claim. It was about choosing a different kind of suffering. It was about men who refused one master and accepted 100 dangers instead. It was about living loudly because tomorrow was uncertain, because the horizon always promised either fortune or the end. And somewhere among them was always a young man gripping the rail at night, watching the dark water slide past, realizing too late that the sea did not care why he had come, only that once he belonged to it, it would decide when to let him go, drawing him forward through hunger and fear and fleeting joy, until one night the wind would rise, the deck would tilt beneath his feet, the sky would vanish behind rain and shouting voices, and he would feel the ship groan like a living creature on the edge of breaking, knowing there would be no turning back as the storm closed in and the ocean reached up, patient and cold, ready to claim what it always claimed in the end, leaving behind only silence where a life had once struggled to be heard. And the rain would fall so hard it felt solid, each drop a sharp knock against skin and wood, the world reduced to darkness and motion, the sea lifting the ship and slamming it down again, as if testing how much it could endure. Men shouted orders that no one could hear. Hands burned as ropes were hauled and lost again. Somewhere a mast cracked, a sound like a bone snapping deep inside a body, followed by a scream that vanished instantly into the wind. In storms like these, the truth of pirate life revealed itself fully. There was no romance in clinging to wet rigging while salt water filled the mouth and lungs, no glory in watching a shipmate slip, fingers scraping uselessly before he was gone, swallowed so quickly it was as if he had never been there at all. No prayers were answered. The ocean did not bargain. It simply waited, immense and calm beneath its violence. When dawn finally came, it did so without apology. The sea often lay smoother after its rage, as though nothing had happened. Broken spars floated. Torn sails hung like wounded skin. The dead were counted, quietly. Sometimes they were too many to remember by name. The living worked without complaint, because work was the only thing that kept the mind from wandering toward what had been lost. Days blurred together at sea. Time was measured by watches, by meals, by the slow shifting of the sun across the sky. A pirate learned the language of the ship's creaks, the the way the hull spoke differently in shallow water, the way the wind changed before a squall. He learned to read faces, too. Fear had many expressions, so did regret. Not all suffering came from nature. Men carried their own storms inside them. Arguments broke out over shares, over perceived slights, over nothing at all. Knives were drawn, pistols were cocked. The articles of agreement were read aloud as warnings, punishments enforced swiftly to prevent worse violence. A man might be marooned on an island with a pistol, a little powder, and a bottle of water, a punishment that sounded merciful until one considered the endless waiting, the sun, the thirst, the slow erosion of hope. Ports brought no real rest. Pirates could not walk openly. They moved in shadows, spending money quickly because they knew how easily it could be taken away. Taverns were loud and dangerous. Rum flowed, dulling memories and sharpening tempers. Fights erupted. Knives flashed. Sometimes the law arrived suddenly, muskets raised, and chaos followed. More than one pirate died, drunk on a tavern floor, far from the sea, yet never truly free of it. The older men grew quieter over time. Their bodies told stories in scars and limps, missing fingers, cloudy eyes. They spoke less of riches and more of survival. Some warned the younger ones, though the warnings were rarely heard. Youth always believed it would be different for them, that they would be clever enough, lucky enough to step away before the end. Luck was a fragile thing. A successful raid could lift spirits for weeks. Gold and silver were heavy and real, proof that the suffering had meaning. For a while, men ate better, laughed more easily, dreams returned. But the treasure also brought attention. Rumors spread, hunters followed. Each prize carried the seed of the next danger. Naval ships were relentless once they caught a trail. They were faster, better armed, disciplined. When pursuit began, fear crept into even the bravest hearts. Sails were pushed hard, water was rationed, sleep disappeared. A single mistake could bring broadsides tearing through hull and flesh alike. Battles with Navy ships were different from merchant raids. There were no easy victories, only desperate calculations. When defeat came, it came absolutely. Men were chained, bruised, stunned by the sudden stillness after violence. The ship that had been their world was taken, examined, stripped of its character and reduced to evidence. The journey to trial was long. Hope thinned with each mile. Some men planned escape. Most simply waited. Courtrooms smelled of ink and authority. Charges were read. Witnesses spoke. The outcome was rarely in doubt. Piracy was not a crime that invited mercy. Sentences were pronounced with practiced calm. Death by hanging, display as warning, words that ended lives. In the days before execution, time behaved strangely. Some men talked constantly, trying to outrun their thoughts. Others withdrew into silence. A few wrote letters that would never be delivered. Chains rubbed skin raw. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams were cruel and vivid. The final walk to the gallows passed through cheering crowds, faces blurred together. The sea was often visible from the dock, calm and indifferent. The rope was placed, the world narrowed, and then there was the drop, the sudden tearing sensation, the rush of air, the desperate fight of a body refusing to accept what the law had decided. Those who died quickly were considered fortunate. Afterward, the world moved on. Ships sailed. Trade continued. New boys watched from shore, hearing stories twisted by time into something brighter than reality. They imagined freedom, imagined gold, imagined a life larger than the one waiting for them on land. The sea waited for them, too, because it always does. It waited through centuries, through changing flags and laws, through the rise and fall of empires. It kept the bones of the forgotten and the infamous alike. It remembered every scream, every song, every whispered promise made under stars that did not care who lived or died beneath them. And if you listen closely, when the night is quiet and the water is dark, you might almost hear those voices still, carried on the wind, telling the truth too late, warning that the horrible life of pirates was never about glory, only about men who stepped into the open mouth of the ocean, believing they could survive its teeth, and who learned, one by one, that the sea does not forgive, does not remember kindly, and does not ever give back what it decides to take, drawing every story to the same slow ending, where the water closes, the light fades, and the world continues on without pause, without witness, without mercy, as if nothing at all had happened.
The silence after those endings was never complete. Even when a pirate's body was gone and his name stopped being spoken, the life he had lived left faint marks, like grooves worn into wood by repeated touch. Ships carried habits forward, men carried memories they could not set down, and the sea carried everything else. On any given night, far from ports and gallows, a pirate ship drifted under stars that looked close enough to touch. The deck creaked softly, the water whispered against the hull. Someone stood watch, leaning on a rail worn smooth by generations of hands, eyes scanning darkness that felt alive. Below deck, men slept fitfully, bodies swaying with the ship, dreams tangled with salt and fear. A cough echoed. Someone turned in a hammock. Life continued, not boldly, but stubbornly. For those still alive, tomorrow was never abstract. It was wind and weather, hunger and discipline, the constant question of whether the horizon would bring prey or pursuit. Charts were unrolled and argued over. Captains listened more than they spoke, knowing authority on a pirate ship depended on trust that could vanish overnight. A poor decision could end in mutiny. A cautious one could end in starvation. Every choice balanced on a thin line. There were moments when the ocean looked almost gentle. Sunlight glittered. Flying fish broke the surface like scattered thoughts. Men joked, repaired clothes, cleaned weapons they hoped not to use. In those hours, the life felt almost ordinary, almost sustainable. It was in these quiet stretches that the weight of it all pressed hardest. Without immediate danger, memories surfaced. Faces from childhood, voices from long ago, questions without answers. Some men spoke to the sea when no one was listening. They cursed it, bargained with it, confessed to it. The ocean never replied, but it never needed to. Its presence was answer enough. As weeks passed, supplies dwindled, tension returned, eyes narrowed, the need for a target became urgent. When a sail finally appeared, small against the horizon, the ship seemed to wake like an animal scenting food. Orders snapped, guns were readied, flags were raised at the last possible moment, hearts pounded. The familiar ritual began again. Each raid reinforced the truth that survival depended on taking from others who were only slightly less desperate. Screams rose, deals were struck, choices were forced. Afterwards, as loot was counted and divided, the cycle reset. Guilt was buried beneath necessity, perfection postponed. In the rare moments when a pirate paused to truly consider his life, it was often too late to change it. The sea had reshaped him. His body moved differently now, balanced against rolling decks. His eyes measured distance and threat instinctively. His sense of time had shortened. Years no longer stretched ahead. Only the next voyage did. And always, just beyond thought, lingered the end he had seen so many times, the rope, the cage, the water closing over a struggling shape. Death was not a surprise in this life. It was a companion, patient and familiar. Yet still, ships sailed on.
Because men endure even when hope thins to almost nothing. Because motion feels better than surrender. Because the sea, for all its cruelty, was the only home many of them had left. So nights came and went, storms rose and passed. Men were lost, men were gained. Stories grew longer with each telling, smoothing over pain, sharpening moments of daring. Somewhere a boy listened. Somewhere a ship creaked toward another uncertain dawn. And the ocean, unchanged and unchanging, rolled beneath it all, carrying every life forward without haste, without pause, drawing each one deeper into its vast, indifferent patience, where even the strongest will eventually grew quiet, and every voice, no matter how loud it once was, faded into the endless sound of water moving in the dark. That sound was never the same twice. Sometimes it was a gentle lap against planks, rhythmic enough to almost lull a man into peace. Other times it hissed and slapped, sharp and insistent, as if reminding those aboard that patience did not mean kindness. The ship responded to it constantly, timbers expanding and shrinking, nails groaning, ropes tightening and loosening like muscles that never fully rested. On one such night, when the wind had dropped and the sails hung slack, a thin moon floated above the mast, casting pale light across the deck. A man sat near the bow, back against a coil of rope, turning a coin slowly between his fingers. It caught the moonlight with each movement, flashing briefly before dulling again. He had taken it from a merchant months earlier, and though he had many like it, this one he kept separate. He did not remember why. Perhaps it reminded him of the moment before the shouting began, before fear took over, when the world still felt balanced. Below deck, someone murmured in their sleep. Another man shifted, hammock creaking. The smell of tar and sweat hung thick in the warm air. A rat skittered along a beam, fearless in a place where fear had lost meaning. Life persisted in small, unremarkable ways. At dawn, the lookout's voice cut through the quiet. A sail, distant but real. The ship stirred. Men rose, rubbing eyes, pulling on coats stiff with salt. The captain came on deck, face unreadable. No speeches were made, none were needed. Everyone knew what this meant: opportunity or danger, often both. As the hours passed, the shape on the horizon grew clearer. A merchantman riding low, not fast, not heavily armed. A calculation unfolded silently across the deck. The decision was made without ceremony. Canvas was set. The ship leaned into the wind and began to close the distance. During the approach, time stretched. Every creak felt loud. Every movement seemed exaggerated. Men checked weapons again and again, hands trembling despite themselves. Some whispered prayers. Others stared ahead, empty-eyed. Fear and anticipation twisted together until they were indistinguishable. When the moment came, it came suddenly. Flags rose, cannons roared, smoke swallowed the air, shouts overlapped. The two ships drew close enough for faces to be seen, pale and terrified on one side, grim and determined on the other. The impact of wood against wood shuddered through both hulls. What followed was confusion made physical. Pistols flared, steel rang against steel. Men slipped and fell. Orders dissolved into instinct. A scream rose and cut off abruptly. Blood darkened the planks. Somewhere, a boy who had signed on only weeks earlier froze, eyes wide, unable to move until someone shoved him forward, and the world narrowed to survival alone. It ended, as these things often did, not with a final dramatic blow, but with exhaustion. Resistance collapsed. Weapons were dropped. Silence crept back in, broken only by labored breathing and the soft crackle of cooling metal. The pirates moved through the wreckage methodically, faces closed, already preparing themselves for the next necessity. Later, as the captured crew was sorted and the cargo assessed, the sea resumed its steady motion, indifferent to what had just occurred upon its surface. A few bodies were slid over the side. They vanished quickly, leaving no trace beyond a brief disturbance of water that smoothed itself out almost immediately. By evening, the ships had separated. One limped away lighter than before. The other turned back toward open water, sails full once more. On its deck, men counted shares, bound wounds, and avoided one another's eyes. No one celebrated. The victory felt thin, worn. That night, the man with the coin sat again near the bow. His hands shook now, though he could not say why. He closed his fingers around the metal and pressed it into his palm until the edge bit into skin, grounding himself in pain that was simple and real. The sea slid past, endless and dark, carrying them onward, always onward, toward whatever waited beyond the next stretch of water, toward days that would look much like this one, and yet never quite the same, toward an end that remained unseen, but never unfelt, moving with them, beneath them, around them, as constant as the tide that rose and fell, without rest, without judgment, without ever asking who deserved what it would eventually take.
The coin stayed clenched in his hand until sleep finally claimed him, shallow and restless, broken by dreams that felt more like memories replayed without permission. He dreamed of land that did not move, of a floor that stayed where it was meant to be, of silence without the breathing of water beneath it. He woke before dawn with his jaw tight and his heart already racing, unsure for a moment where he was until the familiar sway reminded him. Morning came pale and cool. The light revealed what the night had hidden. Blood had dried dark between the planks, already stiffening. Someone scrubbed at it with a bucket and brush, pushing the stain toward the scuppers, where it thinned and disappeared into the sea. Another man stitched a torn sleeve with hands that trembled just enough to notice. A third sat quietly with his back to the mast, staring at nothing, a bandage wrapped around his head, eyes unfocused. No one spoke much. Words felt unnecessary and dangerous, as if naming what had happened might give it more weight than it already carried. The ship moved steadily, sails drawing, the horizon unchanged. Hunger returned quickly, cutting through lingering adrenaline. Biscuit was passed, water followed. Men ate without tasting. As the sun climbed, the wind shifted. The captain adjusted course slightly, consulting charts that were more suggestion than certainty. The quartermaster moved among the crew, taking quiet note of injuries, of tempers, of who had taken more risks than sense allowed. Order was maintained not through force, but through attention. On a pirate ship, neglect was often more dangerous than cruelty. By midday, heat settled heavily. The deck grew slick with sweat and salt. Flies appeared, drawn by smells the men tried not to think about. Someone retched over the side. Someone else laughed too loudly, a short, sharp sound that ended abruptly when no one joined in. The afternoon stretched long. Work filled it, because work always did. Ropes were checked. A torn sail was patched. Guns were cleaned and reloaded. Each task was performed with practiced motions, muscle memory carrying men through when their thoughts drifted too close to what they had seen. The sea rolled on, indifferent to effort and fatigue alike. Toward evening, clouds gathered low on the horizon, bruised purple and gray. The air thickened. A few men glanced skyward, measuring distance and direction, judging whether the weather would reach them or pass by. Storms were always a possibility, never an event to be met with surprise. Preparations were made quietly, without panic. The ship had endured worse.
As dusk fell, the clouds drifted away, leaving behind a sky streaked with fading light. Relief passed through the crew almost unnoticed. Supper was meager but warm, a small comfort. A small comfort. Someone hummed a tune under his breath. Another joined in softly, then stopped, embarrassed by the sound of his own voice. Night settled fully. The watch was set. Lanterns were shaded. The sea darkened until it seemed to absorb what little light remained. Stars emerged, distant and cold, scattered across the sky with no concern for the men beneath them. The man with the coin took his turn at the rail. The metal rested now in his pocket, warm from his body. He watched the water slide past, a constant shifting surface that never revealed what lay beneath. His thoughts drifted without direction. Faces from the day's violence rose and faded. A question surfaced, one he had learned not to ask aloud. How many more times could he do this? The answer came unbidden, as many times as it took, until something stopped him. A sound carried across the water, faint at first. He leaned forward, listening. The creak of the ship, the sigh of wind through rigging, then something else, distant but distinct. A voice, or only the sea playing tricks, shaping sound from movement and space? He held his breath. The sound did not repeat. The night resumed its quiet. Below deck, men shifted in their sleep. Above, the sails whispered. The ship cut steadily through the dark, leaving a wake that glowed briefly with disturbed life before fading again. The ocean closed behind them, erasing evidence of passage, as it always did. Hours passed. The watch changed. Fatigue pressed in, heavy and dull. The man handed off his post and moved below, careful on the ladder, body swaying automatically to match the ship's motion. He settled into his hammock, fabric rough against skin, and stared into darkness where shapes formed and dissolved. He thought of nothing deliberately. He let the movement carry him. The ship sailed on through the night, unchanged, unremarked upon by the vastness around it, carrying its small collection of battered lives forward without promise or pause, toward another dawn that would arrive whether anyone was ready for it or not. Sleep came unevenly, drifting in and out like a tide that could not decide its strength. The hammock rocked, ropes creaked, and the air below deck stayed thick and warm despite the night outside. Somewhere a man snored softly. The sound cut short when he shifted and woke himself. Another muttered words that had no shape, fragments of thought escaping into the dark. The man with the coin dreamed again. This time it was not of land, but of water that would not move, a surface frozen and smooth, reflecting a sky with no stars. He stood at its edge, unable to step forward or back, aware only of a weight in his pocket growing heavier by the moment. When he reached for it, his hand passed through his coat as if through mist. The weight remained. He woke with a sharp intake of breath, heart hammering, the ship still swaying beneath him, as if nothing had happened. He lay still, listening, waiting for his pulse to slow. The darkness felt close, pressing. After a while, he swung his legs down and stood, careful not to wake the others. The ladder up creaked softly under his weight. He paused, then continued. On deck, the night air felt cooler, cleaner. The stars were brighter now, the moon higher. The sea moved steadily, its surface broken only by the ship's passage. He walked toward the stern, boots quiet on the planks, and leaned against the rail. From here, the wake stretched out behind them, a pale disturbance fading into black. He slipped the coin from his pocket again. It caught a glint of starlight, dull but persistent. He rubbed it between his thumb and finger, grounding himself in its solidness. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried, lonely and brief. A shape moved near the mast. Another man, also awake, stood there, arms folded, gaze fixed outward. They did not speak. Words were unnecessary. The presence of another living person was enough, a reminder that the night, however wide, was not entirely empty. The hours edged forward. The watch changed again. The sky lightened almost imperceptibly, black softening into deep blue. The sea seemed to breathe, lifting and lowering the ship with a steady rhythm. With the coming light, small details returned. The frayed edge of a rope, a patch in the sail, a dark stain that scrubbing had not quite erased. When dawn finally broke, it did so quietly. No announcement, no drama, just light spreading across water, revealing the same horizon as always. The crew stirred. Men emerged onto deck, blinking, stretching sore muscles. Someone yawned widely. Someone else cursed softly at a stiff joint. Breakfast was prepared. Biscuit again. Water again. A man cracked a joke about the meal that fell flat, but no one held it against him. They ate, standing or sitting where they could, eyes drifting to the line where sea met sky. The captain appeared, scanning the horizon, expression unreadable. A few words were exchanged with the lookout. Course was held. There was nowhere else to go. As the sun rose higher, warmth returned. The ship moved on, cutting its path through water that did not remember it. The men settled back into routine, because routine was safer than reflection. The coin slid back into a pocket. The past stayed where it was for now. And the sea carried them forward, steady and patient, toward whatever waited next, offering no sign, no warning, only motion, endless and unbroken, as it always had, as it always would.
The morning settled fully, light spreading until the shadows beneath the rigging shortened and lost their sharpness. The heat followed, slow but insistent, pressing down on shoulders and backs. Sweat darkened shirts already stiff with salt. The smell of the ship thickened as the day warmed, wood and tar and human bodies blending into something that could not be separated into parts. Work filled the hours because it had to. The sea did not pause to give men time to think. Lines were checked again. A loose knot was retied. A barrel was shifted to balance the load. Each task carried out with the same quiet efficiency, hands moving almost without instruction. Voices stayed low. Even laughter, when it came, sounded cautious, as if the air itself might take offense. The man with the coin joined a small group repairing a section of railing damaged in the last engagement. He held planks steady while another hammered nails home. Each strike sent a dull vibration up his arms. The sound was solid, reassuring in its simplicity. Wood met iron. Iron sank into wood. The ship accepted the repair without comment. As the work went on, his thoughts drifted despite himself. He remembered his first days at sea, the way everything had felt too large, too loud, too alive. He had been younger then, thinner, his hands softer. He had believed that fear would lessen with time. Instead, it had changed shape. It no longer rushed in all at once. It settled in slowly, quietly, like a second skin. A shout rose from the bow, not sharp, not urgent, just a call. The lookout pointing. Heads turned. Eyes followed his arm toward the horizon. Another sail, barely more than a suggestion against the brightness of the water. The ship did not react immediately. No rush, no scramble. The captain studied the distant shape for a long moment, weighing distance, angle, speed. The crew watched him, waiting.
This pause was always the hardest part. Possibility hung in the air, heavy and undefined. At last, a small nod. Orders followed, calm and measured. The ship adjusted its course almost lazily, as if this were no more than a routine correction. Sails caught the wind. The hull leaned slightly, eager despite itself. As the distance closed, details emerged. The cut of the sails, the height of the masts. Not a warship, that much was clear, but not a helpless prize either. Murmurs spread, brief and contained. Men began to prepare, each retreating into his own private focus. The man with the coin checked his pistol, feeling the familiar weight, the worn grip. He ran a thumb along the edge of his blade, careful not to draw blood. His mouth felt dry. He swallowed and adjusted his stance as the deck shifted beneath him. Time stretched again, the approach unfolding slowly, inexorably. The sun climbed higher, sweat stung eyes. Somewhere a gull cried, high and sharp, indifferent to the tension building below. When they were close enough now to see figures moving on the other deck, the final moments ticked past with painful clarity. The wind snapped the sails, the sea slapped against hulls, the world narrowed to distance and motion. The signal came, flags rose, cannons thundered, the sound ripping through the air and reverberating through bone and chest. Smoke billowed, acrid and thick. The deck shuddered beneath the recoil. Shouts overlapped, blurred into noise. The impact, when it came, was brutal and immediate. Wood struck wood, ropes were thrown, grapples bit. The two ships locked together, unwilling partners in a violent dance. The man surged forward with the others, the world reduced to movement and threat. A face appeared in front of him, eyes wide, mouth open in a sound he never heard. Steel met steel, his arm jarred with the impact. Someone fell against him, heavy and sudden, then slid away. Smoke burned his lungs. The smell of blood was sharp and unmistakable. The deck was slick now, dangerous. He adjusted without thinking, knees bent, weight low. A shot rang out nearby. Splinters flew. Pain flared along his shoulder, hot and immediate, but he did not stop to look. Minutes passed, or seconds. It was impossible to tell. The noise rose and fell like waves, crashing and retreating. Gradually, resistance weakened. Shouts turned pleading. Weapons dropped. The tension drained away, leaving behind a hollow quiet that felt almost unreal. When it was over, the man stood still for a moment, breathing hard, chest tight. His shoulder throbbed. Blood soaked the fabric of his sleeve, though he could not tell if it was his or someone else's. Around him, men moved with practiced detachment, securing prisoners, checking the wounded, stepping carefully around bodies that would not move again. The sea continued its steady motion, unconcerned. The sun shone. The wind carried the smoke away. Later, as the ship separated and the immediate work was done, exhaustion set in like a weight. The man sank onto a coil of rope, head bowed, hands resting on his knees. His fingers brushed the coin in his pocket. He closed his hand around it, feeling its familiar shape, anchoring himself once more in something solid. The day moved on. The horizon remained unchanged, and the ship, bearing its marks of violence and survival alike, turned once again toward open water, carrying its crew forward without pause, the rhythm of waves beneath them steady and relentless, as if they reminded them that this moment, like all others, would pass, leaving only the motion behind. The coil of rope was rough beneath him, fibers biting lightly into skin through damp cloth. He stayed there longer than he meant to, letting the noise of the ship settle back into something recognizable. Around him, voices were low and practical. Orders were repeated. Answers came back. Someone laughed briefly and then stopped, as if surprised by the sound of it. A man passed him a strip of cloth without comment. He nodded and wrapped it around his shoulder, tightening it with his teeth until the pressure dulled the sharper edge of pain. The blood slowed. It would scar. Everything did. He rolled his shoulder once, testing it. Then again, it held. The captured ship drifted alongside for a while longer, its crew gathered under watch, faces pale and fixed. Their eyes followed every movement on the pirate deck, trying to read what would come next. Some stared with open fear. Others looked empty, already retreating inward. The pirates did not meet their gazes for long. There was no pleasure in it, only procedure. Cargo was transferred piece by piece. Crates were pried open. Barrels rolled across planks with dull thuds. The work was slow, deliberate. Sweat ran freely now. The sun sat high and unforgiving. The smell of gunpowder lingered, mixing with salt and iron until it felt like it coated the inside of the lungs. When it was done, the separation was quiet. Lines were cast off. The merchant ship pulled away, lighter, damaged, still afloat. No farewell was exchanged. The distance between them grew, water widening until the other vessel became just another shape on the horizon, then nothing at all. Only then did the ship exhale. Men leaned against rails, sat where they stood, lay flat on the deck staring up at the sky. Fatigue took its time, spreading slowly through limbs and backs, settling deep. Someone passed around a bottle. It made its way from hand to hand, each man taking a small swallow, no one greedy enough to break the unspoken rhythm. The man with the coin drank when it reached him, the liquid burning briefly before warmth followed. He handed it on and closed his eyes. Behind his lids, shapes moved, flashes of motion, fragments of faces, but he did not chase them. He let them pass. As the afternoon wore on, the ship returned to itself. Blood was washed away. The deck was scrubbed again, this time more thoroughly. Broken gear was gathered and repaired where possible. The wounded were tended to with quiet efficiency. Pain was acknowledged but not indulged. There was work to be done, and doing it kept worse thoughts at bay. The wind shifted slightly, favorable. Sails were adjusted. The ship leaned into its course, cutting cleanly through the water. The wake fanned out behind them, briefly bright, then gone. Toward evening, the light softened. The heat eased just enough to be noticed. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the deck like slow-moving hands. The smell of cooking rose faintly, thin but welcome. Men gathered without urgency, sitting close, sharing what little there was. The man with the coin ate in silence, listening to the low murmur around him. Someone spoke about a port they might reach if luck held. Another mentioned weather ahead. The talk stayed practical, close to the present. No one spoke of the fight. No one needed to. As the sun touched the horizon, the sea took on color again, deepening, darkening. The sky burned briefly, then cooled. Night crept in without ceremony. Lanterns were lit. The watch was set. He rose when his turn came and walked back to the rail. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and unreadable, just as it always had. He slipped his hand into his pocket and felt the coin there, steady and familiar. For a moment, he considered throwing it into the water, watching it vanish, freeing himself of its weight. He did not. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, eyes on the darkening waves, and stayed there as the ship moved on, carrying him with it, the rhythm beneath his feet unbroken, the night closing gently around them, indifferent and endless, promising nothing, taking nothing yet, simply allowing the motion to continue. The night deepened, thickening around the ship until the edges of the deck blurred into the water. Stars sparkled above, distant, indifferent, and the moon hung low, casting a pale, watery light that reflected off the swells like scattered silver. The wind shifted again, gentle now, teasing the sails with a soft sigh. The ship leaned into it, moving steadily, almost lazily, though the crew knew better than to let their guard down. The ocean never rested. Neither could they. The man with the coin stayed at the rail, hands gripping the weathered wood, feeling its vibrations beneath his fingers as the ship cut through water. His shoulder throbbed faintly, a reminder of the fight earlier, but it was bearable now. He flexed his hand absent-mindedly, feeling the shape of the coin against his palm, grounding him in the reality of weight and metal, of something he could touch, while the rest of the world remained uncertain and fluid. Somewhere behind him, the faint creak of ropes and shifting wood marked the movement of the next watch. Footsteps approached softly. Another pirate, older, his face lined and tanned by countless suns and storms, fell into step beside him. Neither spoke immediately. Silence was easier, safer. The older man eventually exhaled, a long, low sound, and finally muttered, "You ever get used to it?" The question was simple, almost casual, but carried weight. The younger man shook his head slowly. "I don't think you can," he said. His voice sounded foreign to him in the open night. "Not really." The older man nodded, as if agreeing without needing to. He leaned on the rail next to him, hands crossed, watching the horizon. "Some nights, maybe. Most, you just get better at pretending you're calm." They stood together for a while, the ship moving beneath them, wind and water playing a quiet rhythm. The only other sounds were the occasional flap of a sail, a distant gull, a soft slap of waves against the hull. Nothing else intruded. It was a small mercy, rare and fragile. Below deck, the hammocks swayed. Men shifted in sleep, murmuring softly, some coughing, some whimpering against remembered pain. The ship groaned under the motion, the timber settling and creaking like a living thing. The air smelled of tar, salt, sweat, and faint iron from yesterday's blood, lingering in corners that scrubbing could not reach. The smell was familiar now, almost comforting, an anchor to reality. Hours passed with no change. The horizon remained empty. Clouds moved slowly, ghost-like, changing shape in ways impossible to track in real time. Time itself became fluid, measured only by the ship's motion, the swing of the ropes, the subtle rise and fall beneath their feet. The younger man felt his pulse slow, thoughts drift toward distant places he would never reach, streets and buildings, laughter that belonged to another life, a bed that did not rock. The memory was sharp and painful, yet oddly sustaining. A breeze picked up, carrying the faintest sound of water against wood, closer and nearer than before, the quiet rhythm of the ocean pressing in. He inhaled, the salt air sharp and clean. It reminded him that he was alive, that the day had passed and the night remained, indifferent, but offering space to breathe. He let the coin rest against his chest for a moment, feeling the solidity, the reminder that he had survived another day, that he was still here. Far ahead, the horizon darkened subtly, perhaps a storm, or perhaps only the changing night. It did not matter. The crew would respond when necessary. For now, the world was quiet. The ocean carried them onward, and the men moved with it, small and fragile against its vastness. Each breath, each heartbeat measured in survival. The older man finally spoke again. "You keep that coin close?" His tone was lighter now, almost teasing. The younger man allowed a faint smile. "It keeps me honest, or maybe reminds me there's something solid left." "Fair enough," the older man exhaled. "It's a good thing, I guess, to hold on to something real when everything else isn't." The younger man nodded, but neither elaborated. Words were unnecessary. They stood side by side, leaning on the rail, watching water slip past in darkness that seemed almost infinite. Somewhere behind them, the faint light of a lantern swayed on the deck below, marking a sleeping figure, another life passing quietly, unnoticed, except for the sea. Time continued its slow, inexorable movement. The wind whispered through the rigging. The ship followed its course. Stars wheeled overhead. The ocean shifted, a constant presence, neither cruel nor kind, simply present. And the men, young and old, remained with it, carried forward by its patience and its indifference, moving steadily, silently, toward whatever awaited beyond the next horizon.
The night deepened further, velvet black and heavy, folding over the ship like a cloak. The water reflected only faint glimmers from the moon, broken occasionally by the phosphorescent wake that trailed behind the hull. The man with the coin remained at the rail, silent, listening to the faint rhythm of the ship moving through the darkness, a slow, unending pulse that matched the quiet thrum of his own heartbeat. Each swell rose and fell beneath him, insistent and indifferent, carrying him forward without question. Somewhere aft, a lantern swayed, illuminating a few shadows that moved across the deck. Footsteps approached softly on worn planks. Another pirate emerged, younger than the first, but cautious, eyes scanning the horizon, though nothing could be seen yet. He paused beside the man, neither speaking immediately. Their shared silence was not awkward, it was understanding. The night was a place to breathe, and words could wait. A distant splash sounded faintly, lost almost immediately beneath the subtle roar of water against hull. They both turned toward it instinctively, hands tightening briefly on the rail, before relaxing when no further noise followed. The sea had a way of reminding men of its presence, even when all seemed calm, a quiet insistence that life here was never separate from its currents and tides. The man thought again of the coin, feeling it pressed into the pocket of his jacket. He wondered briefly at the weight of it, its permanence in contrast to the impermanence around him. Ships could be taken, men could die, treasure could be lost, yet this small piece of metal remained, indifferent to storms, to battles, to the slow erosion of everything else. The younger pirate shifted slightly. "You ever think about it?" he asked, voice low, hesitant, almost swallowed by the night. "About what?" the man said, without turning, still watching the horizon. "About how nothing out here stays the same, how it all just keeps moving, and we—" He paused, swallowing. "We keep moving with it, whether we want to or not." The man did not answer immediately. He considered the motion of the water, the sway of the deck, the way the ship held itself steady despite their presence. Finally, he said, "It doesn't matter if you want it or not. You learn to hold on to what you can. You learn to let the rest go." The younger man nodded slowly, looking away toward the dark sea. The words made sense in a way that was both comforting and hollow. He was too tired to argue, too aware of his own fragility in a world that measured survival by endurance and quick thinking. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of rope or the faint creak of timbers settling under the constant pressure of movement. Somewhere below deck, someone stirred, coughing lightly. Another shifted in a hammock, murmuring. The air smelled of salt, damp wood, and faint traces of yesterday's toil, lingering like an invisible residue that could not be scrubbed away. The moon climbed higher, pale and steady. Its reflection moved across the waves, dancing briefly with each swell, before smoothing out again. The man with the coin absently rubbed it through his fingers, the motion almost meditative, a small anchor against the vast uncertainty surrounding him. The night pressed in from all sides, yet he felt, briefly, a kind of calm, a recognition that for this moment he was alive, and the ocean, patient and infinite, carried him onward. The first signs of dawn appeared faintly on the horizon, a subtle lightening that did not yet promise warmth. The sky shifted from black to a deep bruised blue, edges tinged with purple.
The air grew cooler, carrying with it the scent of distant currents, of water moving just beneath the surface in ways unseen. The crew, still below or scattered across the deck, adjusted their positions. Movements were quiet, deliberate, as though the world itself was still sleeping, waiting for permission to begin again. The man leaned against the rail one last time before stepping back. His shoulders ached faintly from standing, but the weight of the coin in his pocket reminded him that some things endured, no matter what. The deck beneath his boots shifted with each gentle swell. The ship followed the current steadily, its path unwavering, as if the ocean itself had set the course. He exhaled softly, listening to the rhythm of it all, feeling the slow, inexorable pull forward, and understood that this was the only certainty out here, the motion, the water, and the carrying along, steady and unbroken, toward a horizon that remained indifferent, endless, and quietly immense.
The horizon lightened further, the first pale fingers of dawn brushing across the water, softening the sharp edges of night. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of salt and the faint metallic tang of blood that had long soaked into the planks. The ship moved steadily, its keel cutting through water that seemed endless, carrying men whose lives were measured by motion and survival, by breaths taken and tasks completed. The man with the coin adjusted his stance on the deck, boots firm against the slight tilt as the vessel responded to the subtle shift of wind. He let his eyes wander along the horizon, scanning for movement, for anything that might threaten or offer opportunity, though nothing stirred. The calm was deceptive. He had learned that the sea's patience was not mercy, it was just stillness before another test. From below, the low murmur of men waking carried upward. Some climbed onto deck, faces tired, eyes wary, bodies aching from bruises, scrapes, and the relentless sway of life aboard a ship that never stopped moving. They moved in the rhythm of familiarity, checking gear, adjusting sails, measuring lines, each action performed with a precision that only years of repetition could create. The younger pirate from the previous night appeared again, shoulders hunched, face tight with fatigue, though he forced himself to speak quietly. "Looks like we'll make the next waypoint by noon, if the wind holds." The man with the coin nodded without turning, his attention still on the water. He did not need reassurance. Time on a ship was measured by the swell, the wind, and the position of the sun. Words about progress were almost ceremonial, a way to keep the mind tethered to something tangible while the rest of the world shifted beneath them. As the sun rose higher, the light revealed details that night had obscured: salt-encrusted wood, frayed ropes, the worn edges of sails patched countless times, the small scars on men's hands and faces. Every mark told a story. Every imperfection was evidence of survival. Some men walked along the deck with deliberate care, checking the fastenings, tightening ropes, tending to rigging. Others sat quietly, washing hands, smoothing clothes, or simply staring at the horizon as if it could answer questions no one dared to voice. The man with the coin finally moved away from the rail, walking toward the center of the deck where work needed attention. He helped lift a barrel into place, grunting with the effort, feeling the strain in his arms, a reminder that living here required constant motion. He adjusted the weight, securing it against the swell, and stepped back to survey the balance. Small victories, moments of control, mattered more than the gold they had taken, more than the battles they had survived. They were evidence that life continued, fragile but persistent. Hours passed with the steady hum of activity, punctuated by the occasional shout. Orders were given, acknowledged, executed. The sun climbed higher, heat pressing against shoulders and backs, sweat soaking through shirts. Men adjusted, adapting to the discomfort, knowing the day's rhythm would continue long after their energy waned.
The coin, still pressed in his pocket, was a quiet reminder of the solidity in a world defined by movement, danger, and unpredictability. By afternoon, the wind shifted again, slightly stronger, urging the ship forward faster. The man with the coin returned to the rail, letting the motion of the deck rock him as he watched water slip past, phosphorescent in the sun, glinting with scattered light like fragments of stars fallen to the sea. Somewhere ahead, gulls called, distant and lonely, riding the air currents. He did not think of their cries as anything more than another part of the rhythm, a sound to mark the day's passing. Below deck, hammocks swung gently with the swell. Men slept fitfully, exhausted yet alert in ways they did not understand themselves. Occasionally, someone cursed softly in sleep, shifted, or woke briefly before settling again. Above, the crew moved with quiet purpose. The day was long, unremarkable in its repetition, yet each task performed was a testament to the persistence of life aboard a ship that was indifferent to time, to pain, to history. As the light began to soften again, as afternoon edged toward evening, shadows lengthening, the air cooling slightly, the man with the coin stayed at the rail a while longer, watching the subtle changes in the sea's surface, noting the rise and fall of distant swells, listening to the gentle creak of timbers as the ship adjusted with them. Each sound, each movement was a reminder that he was still alive, that the rhythm of motion continued, carrying him forward, steady and unbroken. As the sun sank lower, painting the horizon in bruised shades of gold and purple, he exhaled slowly, feeling the day's weight settle into his bones. The coin pressed against him, familiar and unyielding, grounding him in the continuity of touch, even as everything else shifted around him. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glimmer of a lantern marked a moving shadow on the deck below, another life passing quietly. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, indifferent yet present, guiding them with a patience that could neither be hurried nor delayed. And the ship, carrying its small collection of battered, breathing lives, moved steadily forward, each wave a gentle insistence that life, fragile as it was, continued, each breath and heartbeat part of the unbroken rhythm, each movement a testament to endurance, until the next change came, as it always did, quietly, inevitably, and without question.
The sky darkened gradually as evening deepened, bruised colors of purple and gray spreading across the horizon. The sun had sunk enough that shadows were long and indistinct, stretching across the deck in uneven patterns, flickering as the ship rocked gently with the swell. The wind had softened, carrying only the faintest saltiness and moisture, and the air held that quiet weight that comes just before night fully claims the world. The man with the coin stood once more at the rail, shoulders hunched slightly against the chill, eyes tracing the gentle rise and fall of the waves as the ship slid through water that neither paused nor waited. The crew moved around him, quieter than during the day. Some tended ropes and rigging, checking knots and lashings with deliberate, careful motions. Others leaned against the rail, backs to the darkening sky, silent except for the soft creak of the deck and the occasional shuffle of boots. Life aboard the ship was measured in these small gestures, tasks performed without hesitation, routine providing its own comfort against the vast unpredictability beyond. A gull cried somewhere ahead, distant and almost mournful, and the man's eyes followed the sound until it dissolved into the evening haze. The coin pressed against his chest again, small and solid, a point of focus in a world defined by motion and change. He rubbed it briefly between his fingers, the dull metal grounding him against the uncertainty of the dark water stretching endlessly on either side. Below deck, the faint murmur of men moving stirred briefly, then faded again. Some stirred in their hammocks, adjusting to the sway, muttering fragments of dreams or complaints that vanished as quickly as they had arisen.
The smell of the day lingered faintly, tar, salt, and a trace of iron from old wounds. But it was almost comforting, a reminder that the ship held them together, steady even amid the chaos and violence that followed them from one engagement to the next. The captain emerged quietly from the shadows near the mainmast, his expression unreadable. He moved among the crew briefly, checking lines, observing men at work, a silent authority carried in measured steps rather than raised voice. Orders were given sparingly, words chosen for clarity rather than volume, leaving the rhythm of the ship itself to enforce discipline. Men followed without hesitation, movements smooth and efficient, each aware that survival relied on attention and timing, not on luck alone. As night fully descended, the moon rose slowly, pale and firm, casting silver streaks across the water. The reflection stretched and twisted with every swell, glimmering faintly against the dark sea, a trail that seemed almost alive. The man with the coin stayed near the rail, leaning lightly against the weathered wood, letting the movement of the ship rock him gently. Each crest and trough of the waves pressed against his body in a rhythm both relentless and reassuring, a reminder that even here, in this fragile and dangerous existence, there were constants he could rely on. The younger pirate from earlier joined him once more, sliding quietly to stand nearby. His posture was hesitant, almost wary, but the silence between them carried a subtle understanding, unspoken but solid. For long moments they watched the horizon together, tracking the water as it shifted, noting each swell, each subtle movement, aware that danger could arrive with no warning, yet also respecting the stillness as rare and valuable. Somewhere on the deck behind them, a lantern swayed softly, throwing fleeting shapes against planks and lines. A man moved through the shadows, adjusting rigging, checking barrels, or perhaps simply walking the length of the deck, a habit born of restless energy and vigilance. The creak of wood, the sigh of rope, the subtle slap of water against hull, all combined into a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat, steady, predictable, yet alive with quiet power. The man with the coin shifted slightly, letting one hand rest lightly against the railing, while the other hovered near his pocket, sensing the solidity there. Time stretched in the darkness, measured not by hours or minutes, but by breath, by the slow rocking of the deck, by the whisper of wind and water around them. Each movement was deliberate, each sound a reminder of presence, of life persisting in small necessary ways. Above, stars emerged faintly, pinpricks of cold light scattered across the sky. They were distant and unmoving, indifferent to the small dramas played out below. The ocean mirrored them in faint glimmers, waves catching the pinpoints and scattering them briefly, only to smooth again as the swell carried the ship forward. The crew continued their quiet work, adjusting sails, tending ropes, performing tasks with careful precision, as if to honor the rhythm of the night itself. Minutes passed, perhaps an hour. The ship moved steadily, its wake faintly illuminated by the moon. The man with the coin exhaled slowly, feeling the subtle strain of muscles relaxing, of tension softened by familiarity and routine. The night pressed in, vast and unbroken, yet somehow protective in its own way. A gentle swell lifted the ship slightly, rocking them all in a silent pulse. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing the rhythm to carry him, to center him, knowing that the motion, the tide, and the inevitability of forward movement were as certain as the sun rising tomorrow. The coin remained warm against his chest, a tiny constant in a life defined by uncertainty and impermanence. Somewhere distant, the sound of water shifting around a submerged reef or distant shoal echoed faintly. The captain's voice drifted briefly across the deck, low and measured, reminding men of positions and duties, though no urgency was needed. Everyone moved with the natural flow, the ease of repetition and experience, responding instinctively to each subtle signal the ship gave, every groan of timber, every whisper of rope. Night stretched onward, deep and patient. The stars wheel slowly across the sky. The moon traced its path in pale arcs. The ship continued to glide through water as it had for centuries, bearing its small, fragile collection of lives onward. Each breath, each heartbeat, each movement a testament to endurance, to survival, to the quiet insistence of motion over stillness. The man with the coin remained at the rail until the first hints of pre-dawn light began to soften the darkness, feeling the constant pull of the sea beneath him, and understanding fully that in this endless rhythm, life and survival were inseparable from the motion that carried them all forward, unbroken, unrelenting, and quietly immense.
The darkness thinned almost imperceptibly, not enough to be called morning, but enough that the edges of things began to exist again. The line where sea met sky softened, no longer a single mass of black, but a subtle gradient, deep blue easing into something lighter. The man with the coin noticed it without consciously deciding to. His body had learned these changes long before his mind did. The night released its hold slowly, reluctantly, as if testing whether anyone truly wanted the day to return. A faint chill lingered in the air. Breath rose and vanished quickly. Somewhere along the deck, a man coughed once, low and restrained, then fell silent again. The ship answered with a soft groan, timber shifting as the swell adjusted beneath it. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just the quiet acknowledgement that motion never stopped, even when men wished it might. The younger pirate beside him shifted his weight, boots scraping softly against the planks. He rubbed his hands together, not to warm them so much as to remind himself they were still his, still capable. His eyes stayed on the horizon, fixed and intent, as though something might appear if he watched hard enough. The man with the coin did not look at him, but he sensed the tension there, coiled and unspoken. The lantern aft burned lower now, its flame unsteady, light thinning as oil dwindled. Shadows grew longer, then less distinct, dissolving as the faintest gray seeped into the sky. One of the crew crossed the deck to tend the light, movements careful, practiced, trimming the wick just enough to keep it alive without wasting fuel. Even light was rationed out here. Below deck, life stirred again. Hammocks creaked. A man swung his legs down, bare feet touching the deck with a muted thud. Someone muttered a curse. Another laughed softly, the sound brief and dry. The ship absorbed it all without comment, carrying voices and silence with equal indifference. The man with the coin finally pushed himself away from the rail. His joints protested faintly, stiffness settling in after hours of stillness. He rolled his shoulders once, slow and controlled, then walked a few steps along the deck, letting the movement restore circulation. Each plank felt familiar beneath his boots, each slight tilt anticipated before it happened. This was not balance learned, it was balance remembered. He stopped near the mainmast, resting one hand against the wood. The mast was warm where countless hands had touched it over time, smooth in places, scarred in others. He pressed his palm there for a moment longer than necessary, feeling the vibration of the ship pass through it, a steady hum that existed somewhere between sound and sensation. The sky lightened another fraction. Not dawn yet, just possibility. A seabird passed overhead, its wings cutting silently through the air. It did not cry this time, it simply moved on, a shadow against a sky that was slowly remembering how to be a sky. The man followed it briefly with his eyes until it disappeared into the dimness ahead. The captain reappeared near the helm, posture straight despite the long night. He spoke quietly to the man at the wheel, words carried away almost immediately by the breeze. A subtle adjustment was made. The wheel turned a fraction. The ship responded, obedient, altering its angle by degrees too small for anyone but experienced to notice. Still, the man with the coin felt it, a slight change in the way the deck leaned into his feet. He returned to the rail, not out of habit this time, but because something in him needed to watch the sea wake up. The surface of the water was changing, texture shifting as light returned, revealing small ripples that night had hidden. The ocean did not sleep, but it did transform, wearing different faces depending on who was looking and when. The coin rested against his chest, warmed now by his body. He didn't need to. Its presence was enough. It reminded him that weight existed, that not everything drifted. Some things stayed exactly where they were placed, even as the world moved relentlessly around them. A thin band of pale light finally appeared at the horizon, faint but undeniable. The day was coming, slow and patient, just like everything else out here. The crew adjusted with it, movements shifting subtly from night watch quiet to the preparation of another long stretch of hours. No announcement was made. None was needed. The ship cut forward through the softening dark, wake spreading behind it in muted silver gray. Breath by breath, wave by wave, it carried them onward into a day that would look much like the last and nothing like it at all.
The pale band at the horizon widened, almost shyly, as if uncertain whether it was welcome. The sea took it first, absorbing the light into its surface until the water looked less like a void and more like a living skin, flexing and breathing beneath the ship. The man with the coin watched the change with the same quiet attention he gave everything now, not expecting meaning from it, only acknowledging that it was happening. A rope slid through a pulley somewhere above, the sound soft but precise. Canvas shifted, answering the slight increase in wind as morning tested its strength. The ship leaned into it, not resisting, not rushing, simply adjusting the way it always did. Men moved without being told. One checked a knot, another coiled loose line. A third stood at the rail, rubbing sleep from his eyes, staring out as if the horizon might speak back if he stared long enough. The younger pirate had stepped away at some point, replaced by another presence nearby, older, heavier in posture, his breathing uneven. This man smelled faintly of old rum and salt. He said nothing, only leaned his forearms on the rail and stared outward, jaw tight. The man with the coin recognized that silence, too. It was the kind that came from remembering things that could not be undone. The sky continued its slow transformation. Gray turned to pale blue, streaked thinly with clouds that looked worn, stretched, as though they had been pulled too many times across the same expanse. Light crept along the deck, touching faces briefly before moving on, revealing tired eyes, unshaven jaws, hands wrapped in cloth, or stained darker where old wounds had healed badly. Below deck, someone struck metal against metal, a dull clink followed by a hiss as a small flame was coaxed to life. The promise of heat drifted upward faintly, not comfort exactly, but function, warmth enough to keep hands steady, enough to remind bodies that the day required movement. The man with the coin shifted his weight again, feeling the subtle ache settle deeper now, not sharp, just present. It was the kind of pain that stayed with you, became part of your posture, your walk. He welcomed it in a distant way. Pain meant awareness. Awareness meant survival. A breeze crossed the deck, cooler now that night had loosened its grip. It lifted the edge of his jacket, brushed against his neck. He closed his eyes briefly, not to rest, but to let the sensation pass through him unfiltered. The ocean spoke in pressure and rhythm, not words. You learned to listen, or you didn't last. The captain's voice carried again, a few more words this time, still low. A course check, a distance estimate. Nothing urgent. The wheel shifted another fraction. The man felt it immediately, the way the deck corrected itself beneath his feet, the way the ship seemed to settle into a slightly different conversation with the water.
Far ahead, the light revealed something darker against the horizon. Not land, too low. A cloud bank, heavy and distant, its underside bruised and thick. Weather, perhaps, or nothing. Out here, even nothing deserved attention. The man kept his eyes on it without focusing too hard, letting it exist without naming it yet. A gull cried again, closer this time, its voice sharp against the quiet. Another answered. Their calls echoed briefly, then faded, leaving the deck in that familiar half-silence where sounds existed but never lingered. The ship moved on, unconcerned with birds or clouds or the slow return of color to the world. Someone laughed softly near the bow, a quick sound, surprised even to the man who made it. It stopped almost immediately, swallowed by the morning air. No one commented. Laughter was allowed, but only briefly, like light. Too much of it drew attention, and attention was never free. The man with the coin glanced down at the water beside the hull. It rushed past in endless variation, no 2 moments the same, yet always recognizably itself. He thought, not for the first time, that this was the cruelest truth of it all. The sea never remembered them, not their names, not their deaths, not their victories. It carried them, tested them, and erased them without hesitation. The sky strengthened. The day was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Men straightened. Work resumed its fuller rhythm. The night watch dissolved into the day without ceremony, without relief. The man remained at the rail a moment longer, then finally turned away, stepping back into the flow of movement and duty, the coin steady against his chest as the ship carried them forward into whatever waited just beyond the next stretch of water.